All right, welcome back to AI Paper Podcast. Today we're diving into a paper that I think a lot of you out there are going to find pretty interesting. It's called, When Can You Get Away with Low Memory Atom? And just to give you the quick rundown in case you only have like a minute to spare, the main idea here is that these researchers have come up with a really clever way to figure out when you can actually shrink the memory footprint of the Atom Optimizer.
Yeah, this is one of those papers that has immediate practical implications. We've all run into those memory limits on GPUs at some point, especially when we're trying to train those massive models everyone's excited about these days.
Exactly. And Adam, I mean, it's like the default go-to optimizer for so many of us. But, you know, it does come with a bit of a memory cost. It's not exactly the most lightweight option out there.
It definitely can be a bottleneck. And what's particularly neat about this paper is that they don't just throw yet another low memory optimizer at the problem. They actually take a step back and try to understand, like, fundamentally when and where those memory savings are possible.
So, you know, just to level set for anyone who might be less familiar with Atom, or, you know, maybe they're coming from a more SGD with momentum kind of background, what is it about Atom that makes it so memory hungry compared to other options?
Yeah, so the big difference comes down to what Atom keeps track of during the training process. With your standard SGD or momentum, you're essentially maintaining like a running average of the gradients. We call those the first moments. Pretty straightforward. But Atom, it goes a step further. It says, okay, I'm not only going to keep track of those average gradients, but I'm also going to keep track of the average of the squared gradients. And those are what we refer to as the second moments.
Okay, so essentially it's like for every single parameter in your model, you've got two sets of these moving averages that Atom's holding on to, right? One for the gradients, one for the squared gradient.
Exactly. And you can imagine if you're dealing with a model that has millions or even billions of parameters, that extra set of moving averages, those second moments, they can really start to eat up your memory.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, every bit of memory counts when you're training these large scale models. It's like a constant balancing act between the model size, the batch size you can use, you know, everything's competing for that precious GPU memory.
Totally. And it can be frustrating because like that memory being used by Atom's second moments, that could otherwise be used for holding, you know, larger activation tensors during your computations, or, you know, even just fitting more of your model parameters on the GPU.
Right, right. So there have been a bunch of attempts to come up with more memory efficient optimizers. But Atom seems to have kind of stood the test of time. And I think, you know, for a lot of researchers, including myself, there's a kind of hesitation to move away from Atom too quickly. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a combination of factors. On the one hand, Atom has just been so widely adopted. There's like a ton of empirical evidence out there that it works really well across a huge range of tasks and model architectures. So there's a level of like trust there. You know, you can usually rely on it to get the job done.
Yeah, it's almost like the safe bet, right? When you're investing so much time and compute resources into training a big model, you don't necessarily want to gamble on a less proven optimizer.
Exactly. And I think, you know, part of it is also just the fact that some of those other low memory optimizers that have been proposed, they don't always deliver on their promises. You might see some promising results in certain specific settings, but then when you try to apply them more broadly, the performance just isn't consistent.
Right. So, you know, this paper tries to kind of bridge that gap, right? They're not saying throw Atom out the window. They're saying, let's be a bit more intelligent about how we use it, and let's figure out when and where those memory savings are actually feasible.
Absolutely. And the key tool they introduced for doing that is this the signal-to-noise ratio analysis, or SNR analysis.
And can you break down what that analysis actually involves? I know it can sound a bit intimidating at first glance.
Yeah, no, it's actually pretty intuitive once you get past the notation. So the basic idea is this. Atom, right, it keeps track of a second moment value for every parameter in your model. And those second moments, they're typically stored in these big matrices or tensors. What the SNR analysis tries to do is figure out, okay, for a given group of parameters, let's say all the weights in a particular layer, can we actually simplify the way we store those second moments without losing too much information?
And by simplify, you mean like instead of storing all those individual values, can we just use like a single average value for a bunch of them?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the signal-to-noise ratio comes in. What they're basically doing is looking at the variation within those second moment values along different dimensions of that matrix. They're asking, okay, is there a lot of variation between these individual second moment estimates? Or are they all pretty similar?
So like if all those second moment values are kind of clustered around a similar value, then maybe we can just use their average, right? Because the signal, the overall trend, is strong compared to the noise, the individual variations.
Precisely. And if that signal-to-noise ratio is high, it's telling us, hey, there's probably some redundancy here. We can probably compress this information without losing too much. But if the SNR is low, it's saying, wait a minute, there's a lot of important information encoded in those individual second moment values. We can't just average them out without potentially messing things up.
Got it. And they didn't just propose this metric, they actually went and applied it to a bunch of different models and training scenarios to see what they could learn.
Yeah, they really put it through its paces, and the results are super interesting. So let's start with language pre-training. They looked at those big GPT-style models. What did they find there?
So for the GPT models, they found some really interesting patterns, like for the token embedding layer and the language modeling head, which often shares weights with the embedding layer, they noticed that these layers didn't like being compressed along the token dimension, the dimension that corresponds to the size of your vocabulary. But they were more compressible along the embedding dimension itself.
So that suggests that each token in the vocabulary might need its own kind of personalized learning rate adaptation, right? But the different features within a token's embedding, they might evolve more similarly.
Right. And then when they looked at the attention blocks, which are, the heart of those transformer models, they found that the keys and the queries preferred compression along the fan-in dimension, but they resisted compression along the fan-out dimension, which is related to the different attention heads.
So again, it's like each head needs its own specific adaptation. That's kind of cool to see how those different parts of the attention mechanism behave so differently.
Yeah. And on the flip side, the attention values in the output projection, they showed the opposite trend. They were more okay with compression along the fan-out dimension across heads compared to the fan-in. And they also had higher overall SNR values, suggesting that they were generally more compressible than the keys and the queries.
That's fascinating. You'd kind of expect all parts of the attention to behave similarly, but this really shows the nuances there. What about the MLP layers, the feed-forward networks within those transformer blocks?
Well, the MLP layers, they generally preferred compression along the output dimension, the fan-out. But there were some exceptions where they actually saw the compression along the input dimension, or even along both dimensions simultaneously, was possible depending on the specific layer and the training setup.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. The optimal compression strategy really depends on the specific role of that layer in the network.
Exactly. And for the normalization layers, like layer norm, which you see everywhere these days, they found that the ones associated with the attention and the final layer norm, their SNR actually tended to decline after an initial increase during training, suggesting that they become less compressible as you go. But the layer norms within those MLP blocks, they maintain high SNR throughout.
It's almost like the role of those normalization layers changes over the course of training, and that's reflected in how compressible they are.
That's really interesting. So they didn't just look at pre-training though, right? They also looked at fine-tuning. What happened when they took like a llama model and fine-tuned it on a data set like alpaca?
Yeah, so during fine-tuning, they generally saw lower SNR values across most layers compared to pre-training. It's almost like everything becomes a bit more sensitive during fine-tuning, less tolerant of compression.
Makes sense, right? You're making more fine-grained adjustments to the weights at that point. But were there any specific layers that stood out during fine-tuning? Yeah, the attention keys and queries, they were particularly resistant to compression. Their SNR was super low. And the MLP layers were more variable. But the MLP down, the output projection layer, that consistently favored fan-out compression and had a relatively higher SNR.
Oh, and the token embeddings, their SNR went down too, even along the embedding dimension. Maybe because Llama has like a larger vocabulary relative to its embedding size compared to the GPT model they looked at initially.
Right. So vocabulary size seems to play a role here. Larger vocabulary, more sensitive to compression. That makes sense. Now I'm curious, did they only look at language models? What about like image classification tasks with ResNets or vision transformers?
No, yeah, they looked at those too, and they found some pretty striking differences compared to the language models. For ResNets, they generally observed much higher SNR values across the board. So basically, ResNets, very compressible. The intermediate convolutional layers especially, they had super high SNR, and it even tended to increase with depth.
Wow, so totally different picture there. It makes you wonder if it's something about the nature of the tasks or maybe just the inherent structure of those convolutional networks that makes them more amenable to compression.
Yeah, definitely. Now, there were a couple of exceptions in ResNet, like the very first convolutional layer, that one resisted fan-out compression. And the final fully connected layer, its SNR kind of went down later in training. But overall, pretty compressible.
Got it. And what about the vision transformers? Did they fall somewhere in between the ResNets and the GPTs?
Kind of. It was like a mix of both. So for the attention mechanisms in the VFATs, they saw the same pattern as in GPT, with keys and queries preferring fan-in compression and values and projections preferring fan-out. But the SNR values were generally higher than in GPT. That the MLP layers, they were interesting. The first one, the MLP up, it actually favored fan-in compression, which was different from the fan-out preference they saw in GPTs. But the second MLP layer, MLP down, that one stuck with the fan-out preference like in GPT and had high SNR.
Okay, so some similarities, some differences. And what about the initial layers in VIT, the patch embedding, and the final classification layer?
Well, the patch embedding layer, that one preferred fan-in compression, kind of like the first convolutional layer in ResNet. The classification layer's SNR was kind of around 1, so not a strong preference either way. Oh, and one more thing. All the layer norm components in VIT, they had surprisingly high SNR, suggesting they might be more compressible in those vision tasks compared to the language tasks.
So it's not just about the model architecture, it's also about the specific task you're using it for, which makes sense when you think about it.
Totally. Now, beyond just looking at the SNR values themselves, they also explored some of the factors that seem to influence compressibility. Like they talked about heavy tail distributions, especially in the context of vocabulary size in those language models.
Yeah, the idea being that, large vocabularies have more of those rare tokens, and those rare tokens might need their own kind of specialized learning rate adaptation. So when you try to compress along the token dimension, you're essentially averaging out those individual adaptations, and that can hurt performance.
Right. And they also looked at the impact of the learning rate itself. They found that higher learning rates generally lead to lower SNR values, especially in the transformer models. It's almost like at higher learning rates, you're exploring more of the parameter space and things become more chaotic, so you need those individual adaptations more.
That makes sense. You're kind of pushing the optimizer harder, so you need that extra flexibility. And one last thing they looked at was the impact of different initialization schemes.
Yeah, they found that using something called Mitchell initialization, which they use for most of their experiments, that actually led to higher SNR values compared to the default initialization to PyTorch. So it's like the way you initialize your weights can actually influence how compressible your optimizer state is, which is pretty cool.
It all ties together, right? It's like this whole ecosystem of factors that play a role in how effective you can be with compressing those second moments.
Exactly. And all of this analysis leads to their main contribution, a new memory-efficient atom variant called SlimAdam.
So tell me about SlimAdam. How does it actually work? How does it use these SNR insights to save memory?
So SlimAdam basically takes those SNR values that we've been talking about, and it uses them to make decisions about when and where to compress those second moment tensors. It's kind of like a smart compression algorithm.
So it's not compressing everything blindly, it's being selective based on those SNR values.
Exactly. So for those matrix-like second moment tensors, SlimAdam will look at the SNR along different dimensions, find the one with the highest SNR, and if that SNR is above a certain threshold, it'll just replace all the individual second moment estimates along that dimension with their average.
Okay, so it's kind of like if the SNR is high enough, it's saying, hey, we can afford to be a bit more coarse-grained here without losing too much information.
Exactly. Now, for those vector-like second moments, like the ones for bias terms or layer norms, they usually leave those uncompressed because they're already pretty small, and they tend to have more variability.
So it's a targeted approach, focusing on where the compression is going to be most effective. And what kind of results did they see with SlimAdam? Did it actually work in practice?
Oh yeah, the results were really impressive. Across all those models and tasks we talked about, GPT pre-training, llama fine-tuning, image classification with VITs and ResNets, SlimAdam was able to match the performance and stability of the original Atom while using significantly less memory.
That's awesome. So you're actually getting those memory savings without sacrificing performance, which is like the holy grail of this kind of research.
Totally. And in some cases, especially with GPT and VIT, they saw memory savings of up to 98% for the second moments. It's crazy.
98%. That's almost like not even storing them at all. That's huge. And it worked across all those different tasks and models.
Yeah, pretty much. They also found that SlimAdam was actually more stable at higher learning rates than some of those other low memory Atom variants like AddLayer and Atom Mini. And the compression rules they came up with, they seem to generalize well to different data sets and even models of different sizes.
That's really promising. It's not just a niche solution. It seems like it has broad applicability. Now, they also compared SlimAdam to some of those other low memory optimizers out there, right? Like Atom Mini and AddLayer.
Yeah, and the comparisons were really interesting. Like with Atom Mini, their SNR analysis sometimes identified similar compression strategies, but there were also key differences. For example, Atom Mini usually compresses those attention values, projections, and MLP layers along the fan-in dimension, but their analysis suggested fan-out might be better. And Atom Mini compresses layer norm parameters, but their analysis suggested leaving those alone might be better. And, they think those differences in compression strategy might actually be part of why SlimAdam is more stable at higher learning rates.
Interesting. So it's not just about compressing, it's about compressing intelligently.
Exactly. And then with AddAlayer, their analysis kind of supported AddAlayer's idea of keeping those per parameter second moments for the token embeddings, the language model head, and the layer norms. But SlimAdam was still able to match Adam's performance even with much more compression than AddAlayer.
So it's like SlimAdam is getting more bang for its buck in terms of how much compression it can apply while maintaining performance.
Right. And they also looked at some of those other low memory optimizers that are like more radically different from Atom, like SM3, Lion, and Addifactor. But those generally underperformed Atom in their experiments.
Okay, so it seems like for now at least, if you're looking for the best combination of performance and memory efficiency, those Atom variants are still the way to go.
Yeah, I think that's a fair takeaway. And, it's not just about building a better optimizer, it's also about understanding the underlying principles. And they emphasize that this SNR analysis, it's not just useful for building SlimAdam, it's actually a valuable diagnostic tool in its own right.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like, what are some of the other ways you could use this SNR analysis besides just for building memory-efficient optimizers?
Well, they suggest that you can actually use it to get insights into the learning complexity of different layers in your network. Like if a layer has low SNR, it might suggest that that layer is harder to optimize, and maybe you need to rethink the architecture a bit.
That's cool. So it's like a tool for understanding your model better, not just for optimizing it.
Exactly. And they also show how you can use SNR analysis to compare different weight initialization schemes, like we were talking about with Mitchell versus PyTorch default. So it's like a versatile tool for analyzing and improving your models.
Awesome. So to wrap things up, what are your main takeaways from this whole deep dive into when can you get away with low memory Atom?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Atom's memory footprint, it's not set in stone. You can actually reduce it significantly without hurting performance if you're smart about it. And this SNR analysis, it gives us a powerful tool to do that.
Yeah, and it's not just about blindly compressing everything. It's about understanding where the compression is going to be most effective and tailoring your approach accordingly.
Exactly. And I think the fact that SlimAdam was able to achieve those huge memory savings while matching Atom's performance, that's just super exciting. It opens up a lot of possibilities for training larger models and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Definitely. Now, what was the biggest surprise for you in this paper? The thing that made you go, aha?
For me, it was the idea that Atom might actually be using more second moment information than it really needs, especially at those higher learning rates. Like the fact that you can compress so much and still get the same performance, it suggests that there's some redundancy there.
Right. It's almost like Atom is over-parameterized in terms of its memory usage, and that opens up some really interesting questions, like, does that extra memory actually contribute to its performance in some subtle way? Or is it just like baggage that we can get rid of?
Yeah, great question. And that leads to all sorts of other exciting research directions, like could we develop even more efficient compression strategies, maybe something that's dynamic and adapts to the changing SNR values during training? Or, could we design new optimizers from scratch that are inherently memory efficient based on what we've learned from this analysis?
Definitely. This is just the beginning. I think we're going to see a lot more work in this area in the coming years.
For sure. And for anyone who wants to dive deeper, we'll make sure to include links to the paper and the SlimAdam code on GitHub in the description below.
Absolutely. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments. What are you most excited about in terms of future research in this area? What kind of challenges do you think still need to be addressed?
Yeah, let's continue the conversation down there. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.